Hi, welcome to Rough Cut. I'm Jennie Butler. I'm a video journalist and I host this podcast. This is a series of conversations with documentary filmmakers and video journalists and nonfiction video people about their creative process and their experience in this industry. This is the first of many Rough Cut episodes that you'll see on VCTV. Today, we're going to be talking to director Nick Bruckman and producer Amanda Roddy about their upcoming film, Not Going Quietly, which follows healthcare activist Ady Barkan as he travels across the country fighting for healthcare reform. At the same time, he's also battling ALS. The director and producer and I talk about their experience with commercial work and how that process differs from making a documentary. We talk about how they were able to capture such private moments with the characters in the film, and also how they were able to get the Duplos Brothers on board as executive producers. So it's a wide-ranging conversation, and I hope you enjoy it. And I'm Jennie Butler, and this is Rough Cut.
My name is Nick Bruckman. Thanks for having me on the Rough Cut. So yeah, I grew up in New York City. I went to SUNY Purchase for new media and sort of digital communications, and I was a really big activist. This is like Iraq War, 9/11 era, and I wanted at the time to make music videos and experimental films. I was really an art school student, and then once I became aware of what was happening in the world, I realized that I wanted to use all of my sort of skills and talents towards activism. And so film to me was more of a tool of communication at the time. And I ran the school TV station, which was called PTV, and later evolved that into People's Television, which is the company that I started. And right when I was just finished college, I took all the school gear down to Bolivia, and I made a documentary about an undocumented immigrant's journey from Bolivia to New York called La Americana, which was at a lot of festivals and was on Nat Geo and PBS. And then later I produced a film in India where some of my family is from, called Valley of Saints, that was at Sundance. And despite having some kind of indie film success, I was still pretty broke. And I also, I think coming from, this desire of storytelling for social change, I wanted to be able to make films that had impact outside of the indie gatekeeper ecosystem. And the way to hit both of those things of like having a sustainable career and making change was to bring that like Sundance level storytelling to brands and nonprofits. And so in that spirit, started a company with Ryder Hask, who's one of the cinematographers on Not Going Quietly. Amanda's been a team member with us for going on 4 years. And we do all kinds of storytelling for brands, ranging from like Fortune 500 companies like Facebook and Dropbox and Google, all the way to like in the streets, grassroots organizers and movements like Green New Deal and healthcare issues and all types of acting. We're working with the movement for Black Lives now on a lot of Black Lives Matter films. And to kind of cut to the chase on Not Going Quietly, that is the capacity in which I met Ady, because Liz Jaff, his campaign director, I have a mutual friend in common with her, and when Ady met Jeff Flake on the plane and she said, "Oh my God, this guy has a story to tell and we're going to make a movement around him," she needed a launch film made, and she got in touch with me in that capacity to do that film. And then we flew out to Santa Barbara to meet Ady and interview him for what was essentially going to be like a political ad about healthcare and his sad story. And really by that first night of filming with him, I was talking to him about, can we record a Kickstarter for a film that we'll make one day in the future, because his voice was already beginning to fade. And so there was this like immediate clock on his story and the ability to ever make a feature.
I just want to jump back a bit before we even get to People's TV or Not Going Quietly. Just going back to your, did you say it was called La Americana?
Mm-hmm.
Was La Americana, was that your first feature film?
Yeah, it's my first feature and the only other feature that I've directed.
What was that like, just kind of like jumping into that without really any experience? And it seems like the story is pretty ambitious.
Yeah, it was really that project, the story logline, is about an undocumented woman from Bolivia who comes to the United States illegally because her daughter is hit by a car in Bolivia. And so in order to pay her daughter's medical bills, her daughter's paralyzed from the waist down, she has to leave her daughter behind in a wheelchair and come to the US. And so she'd been separated from her daughter for 7 years. And the film documents basically her both mental and emotional journey of leaving the United States, going back to Bolivia to reunite with her, knowing that she'll never be able to come back to the United States. And so yeah, it's really personal and also a super emotional project, like Not Going Quietly, about somebody going through a really terrible and sort of tragic and sort of almost kind of a randomly senseless tragedy, but then turning that into something better, and a tragedy that is connected to a larger political narrative. And yeah, from a filmmaking perspective, it was super hard. I was 22 when I did that film. And as I mentioned briefly, I ran the school TV station, and I had access to the gear room and all of that. And so myself and two buddies from college were like, that was the era when I could call in favors and be like, hey, let's go to Bolivia. Nobody's getting paid, but we're going to make something amazing and it's going to change the world. And unfortunately, I can't really work like that anymore. I feel like all filmmakers get like their one free favor card with their friends, with their editors, with everybody else. And I cash that in to make that project. And so, with this one, it's been the biggest difference is like having to really raise a real budget. We have actual investors on this film. With La Americana, I was able to get some grants, but it was really tough. It was my first film. And even with this one, we've been able to get some grants as well, but it's been really tough. So if the question is about like the overall economics of like indie documentary filmmaking, it's really, really tough. And for us, or for me, one of the ways I made it work is by also doing client work, which I know a lot of folks in VC and in the community do. But I do think both can be really complementary of each other. I think if you can create space to do independent work, then it's really great to be able to make short form stuff. It's really great to be able to like work with brands or people that really need stories told because they're doing work in the field, as opposed to just like every 4 years doing your independent opus. So still trying to strike that balance. I think all of us artists in any medium are.
Yeah, they definitely complement each other financially, obviously, but I imagine also creatively. Like, do you ever get kind of like creative inspiration from the branded work that you're doing? Does that ever bleed into your feature or documentary work?
I would say the biggest way is in the collaborative elements of the people that we work with on commercials and branded content are all the people that I brought on to work on this film. So the cinematographers are people that I'd shot documentary style commercials with, so I knew their work. Amanda had been a producer on our commercial work at the company, and I knew what an amazing producer she was, so it made sense to collaborate with her on this film. And so the ability to work with people in short form content and on specific projects, I think I'm really a firm believer in bringing those people on to independent film work. And for me, those two worlds really cross-pollinate because of the collaboration and the people in our orbit. A lot of whom, by the way, we've met through Video Consortium and at Video Consortium. A lot of people on the People's kind of roster of DPs and editors all came from VC. It's been a huge resource, just to throw in a shameless plug.
I feel like as creative people, we're not really exposed to the tools of like starting a business. Like that just feels like this world that we don't know about. I mean, but having a film is also sort of like starting a business. Like you're raising money and trying to get, people to do their best work. You're building a team. Is there anything you learned from starting a business that you would apply to like making a film?
Yeah, I think just as a starting point, I do feel personally that film and journalism and documentary programs do a really bad job, at least when I was in school of preparing people for the business realities of working in the industry. And that, to me, is something that organizations like VC can play a really good role in. I mean, just the basics of like HR and accounting and payroll, all of which even sole proprietor entrepreneurs need to understand. That's really missing and is really important, I think, even if you're just going into video journalism or not necessarily building a team. But yeah, each film is a business. I mean, literally, you start another LLC for each film. The same rules apply in terms of, I think, trying to create like cohesion and camaraderie and inspiration and getting people on a very long-term endeavor. I think the same rules apply.
Speaking about, I guess, making a documentary film and how that's similar to running a business, although I don't run a business, from everything that I've also observed at Duplos Television and the way that that company is run by Nick and Ryder. So much of making a feature film, especially an independent feature film, is figuring out your finances, figuring out your supporters, figuring out marketing, figuring out how you're going to keep afloat, keep going, keep shooting, time management, making sure that you have continuity. And documentaries take years and years to make. So how do you consistently hire the right people to make sure that everything, is shot in a similar way is really difficult, especially when things and events in your film that you need to capture, occur all of a sudden. And you need to kind of pick up and make sure that you have like a good long roster of people who you know and you trust. And that's in part why we have so many cinematographers on our list. Our shooting this film was difficult because it took place in many different states across the country. So we had to kind of, rely on a lot of people that we had met over the years who have similar styles of cinematography and use similar cameras to make sure that all worked. So a lot of it is just intense planning, intense budgeting, really growing and managing and tracking your network. So a lot of it is just intense planning, intense budgeting, really growing and managing and tracking your network, building a website kind of before we even really were that far into shooting, just to make sure that we kind of we're building everything as we went. We were building our grant strategy plan, we were building our shooting plan, we were building our budget plan incrementally along the way, and we were adapting to, different circumstances or, new challenges that we were facing. So, in many ways, it is very much like running a business. You have to, hire and employ lots of people over the course of 2 years. In this film, we shot in a pretty intense clip. We shot 180 hours of footage over the course of 2 years. So we were on this full time for a while.
Yeah, I can imagine. And just keeping track of this project. I mean, you shot this over years, and they're on the road, and there's just a lot to keep track of.
Yeah, we actually got our own RV to follow their RV. So once they rented theirs, we knew we needed a whole production setup that would be viable, and we really wanted to be in the RV camp. We didn't want to be at hotels or whatever, so we got a production vehicle and followed them and slept in it and stuff, which was my first time really doing the RV life thing.
Yeah, how was it?
It was cool. It's a little tricky to shoot there. I mean, a couple pieces of advice are don't try to edit with a RAID in a moving RV, because it will break. And it's from a production standpoint, and it's just sort of sweaty, dank environment to work in. So when you're really working hard, it doesn't feel like it's probably better for family trip to the Grand Canyon than it is for 5 filmmakers to be in on a 30-day shoot. Yeah. But we made it work, and it was the only way to get the kind of access and intimacy that I think the tour portion of the film has.
Yeah. I definitely wanted to talk about access and intimacy, just to catch up our listeners. We're talking about Not Going Quietly, the feature film, the feature documentary that you're about to finish. It's just about finished. And it is about Ady Barkan, who is a activist with ALS, activist and lawyer, correct?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, with ALS. And I mean, it's such a beautiful film, and the access that you got to the family was just so impressive. And it just, some of the moments that you're able to capture with his health degenerating and the birth of their second child, and just some very, very painful and beautiful moments in their life. And I wonder just like how you were able to get that trust from the family, especially as you mentioned that there were multiple cinematographers on this project. How like you were able to, build trust between the people you were also working with and the family.
Right, totally. I think one thing that is really important to the story and why Ady and Rachel gave us access is because of it's really embedded in the narrative of what happens to Ady, which is that he has his whole life been an activist for various social causes, been a storyteller working with Black and brown communities to fight for economic equality, and never was it about him. He was a kind of white, relatively privileged male, socially inspired person, but it wasn't his story to tell. He was kind of a behind the scenes guy. And then when ALS strikes him, he's in total despair and he feels lost until the moment comes where he realizes, in part through when he confronts Senator Jeff Flake on an airplane, that actually his story matters. His story is going to change this country. It might stop this bill, especially when that video goes viral. It's actually the first time that a lot of people in Ady's, even friends and family, extended, had heard about his diagnosis, because it wasn't something he wanted to share. He didn't want to be pitied. It was something he kept private. But then he realized, oh shit, this makes a difference. Like, people care about what's happening to me. And so, I'd met him just shortly after that. And I think it was very clear to him right off the bat that like exposing his very deep, very personal pain was a political act and was inherently part of the activism. And for me, that's part of what the whole kind of message of the film is the way the personal is political. Ady's like such an extreme example of that, which is putting his death on display as a political weapon, or his degeneration. And so he understood, I think, very intuitively that this needed to be like a warts and all thing. We needed to be in the doctor's office. We needed to be in conversations between him and his wife about how they were going to cope in order to tell the story that he wanted to tell, which was the story of his work in activism. And that helped. Although I think, with Rachel, his wife is a very private person, and that was, a difficult conversation and a lot of trust building exercises and slow ramping into it. The access really increases over time, which I think you can tell when watching the footage. That was a certain challenge. And the last thing I'll say about access is actually the hardest access points were with the activists and the politics of the film. Liz, who's his campaign strategist, had this attitude of, well, I'm the person behind the guy. I don't want to be seen as Ady's voice or the person that made Ady possible. I'm a strategist. We don't go on camera, basically. And that conversation was a lot harder to explain to her. Actually, seeing what you do and how like strategy works and how the sausage gets made and how a message and a movement can be built around one guy's story, like, that's really inspiring. That makes it feel accessible and real to audiences. And that was a much harder conversation, and it took a lot longer to get her on board with the movie.
It's great that you got her though, because I felt like she was one of the best characters. Like, she added so much. When you met Ady, did you know that you wanted to make a film about him?
I think it was a matter of, if we were gonna do it, we had to start talking about it right away. And I think the thing that really made me want to make the movie was his sense of humor. And I think that, he just, at first we thought we were going to go out there to shoot this ad about this, dying father, begging politicians to protect healthcare. And, immediately he was like, we got out there, like he's smoking a joint and he's like, we are going to fuck these guys up so bad. Like, just wait till you see what we can do with these ads. And I was like, wow, this dude is so like taking he's so empowered. He's turned this thing already into a tool to make other people think differently about their own stories and their own lives. And his sort of like, kind of wry Jewish like sense of morbidity and making the best of it was, I think, what made it a real like character story as opposed to an activism like issue movie.
Yeah.
Amongst other, amazing qualities that he has.
Yeah. Yeah, it also just kind of added this like texture to his character. I mean, you already really sympathize with him and you like him as a person, but then when you add in the humor, it just, it adds in this other, it really humanizes him even more, I think. Amanda, tell me how you got involved.
I was involved pretty much from the start. We initially got this call to do the political ads with Ady, which Nick was talking about, and immediately after we were all talking about like, a bigger story here, I think we all kind of fell in love with Ady after meeting him and hearing him speak. I like, not to sound corny, but the first time I heard him speak, it just made me so hopeful. He was able to, articulate that civic engagement and becoming involved in the fight for democracy is something that's not only important, but fun and worthwhile and possible. And the process of doing it is entirely energizing. And it was what was giving him hope to move forward in his life and really sustaining him. And that was really infectious. And I think something that we all, everyone on our team has pretty progressive politics, so he was definitely preaching to the choir when he was sharing all of that. But there's definitely something special about him that we all kind of immediately felt, and so it was kind of a no-brainer about jumping on board and helping to make the film. And it kind of started from there. I was lucky enough to make a few of those political ads with Nick and Ryder, and then afterwards, shortly after, Liz and Ady were like, hey, we're driving an RV across the country from California to Maine. Do you want to jump on board and help us make some political ads? And we're all like, yeah, sure. So I jumped in with all the dudes on the RV and helped make ads along with, working around the clock and also continuing to film with them to start to figure out what this film would be. And at that point, we kind of thought when they were going across the country, you'll see they're fighting to, flip the House for the midterm elections. That's kind of what we thought the film would focus on primarily, but then things kind of got out of control and they kept doing more and more cool stuff. And we couldn't stop filming. So yeah, another year later, we were still filming and I was still there somehow. So
how was this your first feature length film to produce?
Yeah, it was.
How was it different than producing shorter, branded videos? And what did you learn from the process?
Yeah, it's a great question. I started out my career so far in documentary filmmaking, but I've never worked, start to finish on a feature film. And I think a large part of the reason for that is like you really kind of have to dedicate your life to it for a couple of years for as long as you're working on it. So that would be the biggest difference, just the time commitment and the level of belief and passion you kind of have to have in that subject matter or person that whose story you're telling. I think I love doing shorter pieces as well because it really helps you hone in on your skills as a filmmaker. And those videos can also be incredibly effective and compelling and, oftentimes go viral. The difference with the longer piece is that I think there are so many different decisions you can make over the course of years. that can really affect and impact the story that you're telling. And I think the biggest thing too is, I don't know, I think there actually are a lot of differences in the more I'm talking about it. But the biggest thing for this one is we were making a story about someone who was giving us, some of the most precious time left in his life that he had, the time that he was still talking, and the duty that you kind of feel to serve that person and tell their story as well and as powerfully as you possibly can because you owe it to them. That was the biggest thing that was different.
Tell me about how you got the Duplos Brothers on board as executive producers.
So the Duplos Brothers came on because of our other executive producer, who is Bradley Whitford, probably best known as the West Wing actor, and he is an activist himself and a very vocal sort of anti-Trump, pro-progressive figure in Hollywood. And he met Ady at a rally, and Ady connected us to him, and he saw some early footage that we had and was blown away. Him and Ady became super tight over the course of the years as well. Ady actually officiated Bradley's wedding, so they're really, really close. And Bradley and Jay and Mark are really close because Bradley's wife, he met on the set of Transparent, which Jay Duplass was on as well. And so they brought our rough cut over to the DBP folks, Duplos Brothers Productions, and then Amanda and I flew out, showed them some footage. They really loved it and were really blown away. I think what the thing that was really helpful about their sensibilities and why it made sense to work with them is because they really understood the, I think, humorous and offbeat and sort of like subversive elements of the film. I was a huge fan of their doc work because of Wild Wild Country, which I think is one of the best things that's been made in the doc world over the last couple of years, or one of. And so that made it feel like a really good fit to me because they knew how to tell, what I think are political stories, but that reveal a lot about human nature and have underlying and underpinning sort of character and societal critiques in them. And that really spoke to me in terms of wanting to work with them.
And a clip of it showed at the DNC. How did that come about? That's like so exciting.
Yeah, do you want to talk about that?
Yeah, sure. So we continue to make ads with Ady, and the DNC invited Ady to speak. And one thing that Ady and Liz both wanted to do was to share some footage of Ady because his story is so powerful and compelling. It's part of the reason why so many people have gravitated towards him, because he has a story that resonates with many people, because although ALS is rare, the struggle to pay and afford your healthcare bills is something that's almost entirely universal. And so I think many people relate to him and his story. So they advocated and really pushed to release some of the footage to go along with his speech because they thought it would give a lot more added context to what he was talking about and introduce him to a wider audience who may not have known who he is. He's a pretty big figure in progressive politics as an activist, but not so much, nationally.
Yeah.
So now he has this huge platform and people are able to, get a 60-second glimpse out of his story. And I think, we were obviously thrilled to have been able to share some of that as well to kind of draw people in and get them excited about him and what he stands for.
Did they approach you, or how did that even happen?
They approached Ady and his and Liz. I think
I see.
Yeah.
And
Liz
then,
is continuing to kind of put him into all these, situations, and she continues to be, even past the end of the film, his strategist and campaign manager. And you see her in the film push for him to go to speak in front of Congress, and gets all the presidential candidates to sit down with him for interviews. Subsequent to the end of the film, just a few months ago, he met with Joe Biden, and so that led to him being invited onto the DNC. And it's hard to know where to end the film because he continues to do really big things. And we're hopeful that the film, even post-election, will be a really big part of it. And even as sick as he is and as limited as he is by his paralysis, I hope that his best work is ahead of him and that the film can be a introduction to him to the whole country.
Well, that kind of leads into my next question, which is, how did you know when to stop filming? Because he's obviously still very active and this issue is still relevant.
Yeah, well, we really wanted the film. The film is born out of this milestone in Ady's life where three things happen in very quick succession. One is that his first child is born, and the second is that he is diagnosed with ALS, and then the third thing is that Donald Trump is elected president, really invalidating years of the progressive organizing that he'd been doing in his life. And so all three of those things were this really incredible catalyst for him to use the time he had left to try to make the country a better place and to try to fight back against the injustices of the Trump administration and to fight for healthcare, which he needed. And what made a lot of sense to us was because the birth of his son was such a springboard for him as an organizer and to launch his story. It made a lot of sense that him deciding to have a second child, which happens towards the end of our film, was really symbolic of him feeling hopeful for the future of the country. And so that once that happened and it became this really clear arc from the birth of his first child to the birth and the sort of despair that he was in at that time, where he thought that his future with his child had been wiped out, much less the future of the country. He goes on this journey, and at the end, I think to some degree discovers that not only is there, hope for the country and hope for him, for us to, build the kind of society that we want to see, but also hope for him to be the kind of father that he didn't think he was ever going to be able to be, despite the disease. And that intersection between his belief in himself as a father and his belief in the country is the thread that we wanted to tie in the story. And so that made sense as a natural conclusion, not just another speech and another great, win for the progressive movement. Although you see those documented along the way.
When can viewers expect to, or I guess listeners in this case, when can listeners expect to see Not Going Quietly? Do you have a distribution plan yet, or is there anything you can say about that?
So we had the really frustrating situation of our Tribeca 2020 premiere getting postponed, and Tribeca has invited us back to their 2021 edition, which we can all hope will happen in person. I assume with a vaccine in place and all the, Kamala Harris is the vice president and all of the things that we're hoping for next year that we don't know for sure. And that's being pushed to June of 21. But we are trying to sell it and have it come out before then. And we're working with ICM and the Duplos Brothers as our sales agent. But the word on that is still TBD. So in terms of what viewers or listeners can do, would love folks to follow our social channels, and maybe you can post those along with the episode.
Yeah, we'll have those in the show notes.
Yeah, we have not done any virtual festivals yet, and that's been something that's been, probably interesting for this audience. And we may not be making the right decision on this, but so far, as of now, we are holding off on digital distribution until we have a streaming partner, because we feel like if the screenings are virtual anyway, our team feels like we should focus on that first. So that's been, from a business standpoint, that's been something that we're trying to navigate. And I think we're just in the dark, as much in the dark as everybody else in the VC community, about the digital festival landscape. But so far we have, up until now, we haven't fully embraced it yet. And so we're kind of TBD on that in terms of where our festival strategy will be. And hopefully we'll have news not too long after the podcast comes out.
Well, little plug for Rough Cut. If anyone is in the dark about festivals, the uncertain future of festivals, we have an episode about that. I think it's 2 episodes back about festivals during COVID. It's very interesting and a little bit sad. I think that they will be virtual for a while, unfortunately.
Yeah, that's probably the more realistic assessment.
Yeah. Well, thank you guys so much for doing this. This was the film was wonderful, and I can't wait to see what happens with it.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure talking to you.
Yeah, and
I really enjoyed it as well, and I would reiterate like how down I am with VC and Sky and the whole team that puts it together. And I was really glad you reached out to do this, just because I feel like the VC community has given a lot to me and given a lot to People's TV, and I'm really excited to share the film. And I hope we can in 2021 do a screening and invite all the members out, because it would be great to get together in person again. I know we're all missing that.